Imagine being rushed into an ER with cyanide poisoning.
Right.
And the medical team, they don't panic.
No, they don't.
They just hook you up to an IV and pump your veins full of this, like, highly specific synthetic blue dye.
Yeah, and that dye literally leapfrogs over your dying cells to, instantly jumpstart your body's energy production.
It's wild. And now picture a growing group of health optimizers who are intentionally taking a microdose of that exact same blue dye every single morning with their coffee. So today, we're looking at why.
It really completely reframes how we look at human biology. We're taking the research compiled in the metabolic and cognitive blueprint for longevity and, well, moving past that outdated idea that longevity is just about, adding a few extra years of sitting on a porch at the end of your life.
Right. Welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission is to take you through a very specific operating manual for your body.
Exactly. The focus here is on the mechanics of upgrading your physical and cognitive engine right now, in the present moment.
We're taking the clinical trials, the historical anomalies, and expert protocols, and translating them into the why and the how for you. We're going to explore how to manually override broken energy pathways, why freezing cold water might be the secret to forging lifelong memories, and why the little potted plant sitting on your office desk might actually be a source of chronic biological stress.
Yeah, true longevity isn't about overwhelming yourself with a million biohacks. It's about understanding why your body responds to certain specific stresses or nutrients and applying that knowledge.
So let's get right into the cellular engine. The first protocol on the list involves a kitchen blender and 3-day-old broccoli sprouts.
Yes. So the underlying mechanism here focuses on something called radical detoxification, and it relies heavily on the work of researchers like Dr. Jed Fahey from Johns Hopkins.
Yep.
The specific protocol dictates taking a quarter cup of broccoli sprouts, specifically 3 days old, that's important, and blending them in water for about 20 seconds before drinking it quickly.
Blending them seems incredibly specific. I mean, when I was looking at the mechanism for this, it reminded me of cracking a glow stick.
Oh, that's a great way to think about it.
You have those plastic tubes with 2 separate chemicals inside, and literally nothing happens until you physically bend the stick, snap the inner barrier, and let the chemicals mix to create the reaction.
Right. And the cellular architecture of the sprout works the exact same way. You have a compound called glucoraphanin and an enzyme called myrosinase.
Okay, so they're separate.
Exactly. While the plant is just sitting there, they're stored in separate microscopic compartments or vacuoles to prevent them from reacting.
Ah, so the blender is the snap.
Yes. The mechanical action of the blender violently crushes those compartments together. The resulting chemical reaction creates a massive, highly bioavailable dose of a completely new compound called sulforaphane.
Okay, so once you drink this sulforaphane, what is it actually doing inside your body to warrant, making a smoothie out of sprouts?
Well, it acts as a really powerful trigger for a biological mechanism known as hormetic stress.
Which is the whole what doesn't kill you makes you stronger concept, right?
Precisely, but applied at a microscopic level. Sulforaphane activates the NRF2 pathway. Think of NRF2 as the master switch for your body's internal defense and detox engine.
Okay.
When it flips on, it commands the body to drastically increase the production of glutathione, which aggressively hunts down free radicals. I mean, clinical trials demonstrate this reaction is so robust it physically detoxifies airborne pollutants like benzene.
Wow.
Yeah, just pulling them right out of the lungs and excreting them.
The real-world impact of that sounds intense. The materials highlighted a story from a health entrepreneur named Doug Evans, who essentially drank a massive liter of this sprout water.
Right, based on Dr. Fahey's research.
Yeah, and he experienced such an overwhelming stimulant-free surge of raw cellular energy that he dropped to the floor and did 100 push-ups in a single set. And there was another case study of a 37-year-old male dealing with lifelong asthma who used this protocol, completely reversed his symptoms, and abandoned his inhaler.
Yeah, the short-term effect is that sudden clearing of brain fog and a caffeine-free energy spike because you're rapidly lowering systemic oxidative stress. Long-term, you're actively upgrading your body's ability to process and excrete environmental toxins.
Which inherently slows down cellular aging.
Exactly.
But here is the sticking point, though. Pushing toxins out gives you an energy surge, sure, but what if the cellular engines themselves, like the mitochondria, are already fundamentally broken. I mean, you can't just detox your way out of a collapsed energy grid.
Right, you can't. And that brings us back to the emergency room and that blue dye, low-dose methylene blue.
Oh, okay.
When cells are subjected to chronic psychological stress, environmental toxins, or poor diet, they can enter a state known as the cell danger response.
I've heard this described as a biological lockdown mode.
That's exactly what it is.
The cell senses a threat, so it stiffens its membrane and intentionally shuts down its own power plants to prevent the threat from spreading.
It's a protective mechanism, yeah. But it can backfire into a sympathetic spiral of doom where your nervous system gets stuck in fight or flight. At the mitochondrial level, the electron transport chain, which is the assembly line that passes electrons down to generate cellular energy, or ATP, breaks down.
Right.
Specifically, complex 1 and complex 2 of that chain stop functioning. Methylene blue is highly unique because it acts as an alternative electron carrier.
So it bypasses the broken parts.
Exactly. It physically bypasses the broken parts of the assembly line, dropping the electrons off further down the chain to force the cell to produce ATP directly.
It builds a chemical bridge over a collapsed highway.
Great analogy.
And the protocol outlines taking an incredibly small amount, between 8 and 25 milligrams in the morning on an empty stomach. But the raw power of this mechanism is why high doses are FDA approved as the antidote for cyanide, right?
Yes.
Because cyanide kills a person by paralyzing that exact mitochondrial assembly line, and this blue dye acts as an immediate override switch.
Right. Dr. Scott Schur, who has extensively documented this intervention, highlights a specific case study involving a female patient suffering from chronic mold toxicity. Her environment had triggered that intense cell danger response.
So she was in that lockdown mode.
Right. And even after moving and remediating her home, she was suffering from severe paralyzing fatigue. Her cellular engines just refused to exit lockdown.
Wow.
But the introduction of low-dose methylene blue forcibly bypassed the damaged mitochondrial complexes. Within 2 weeks, her cellular energy production resumed, and she returned to work.
That's incredible. It resolves that tired but wired burnout feeling in like 3 days.
Yeah.
But a quick warning for anyone listening and thinking of trying this, you have to be incredibly careful.
Very careful, yes.
The sources make it abundantly clear that methylene blue is a synthetic compound used in various industries. You have to use a reputable, third-party tested, pharmaceutical-grade brand to avoid heavy metal contamination.
Absolutely crucial. Industrial grade will hurt you. But assuming the engine is now running, we run into the next logical problem. Producing cellular energy is basically useless if the glucose is locked outside the cell.
Right, or if the cells are just full of unrecycled garbage.
Exactly. Blood sugar regulation is a massive roadblock to longevity. The failure to get glucose into the cell usually traces back to a hidden deficiency.
Which is where Dr. Robert Lufkin's protocol comes in.
Right. He suggests a highly specific diagnostic tool, the red blood cell, or RBC, magnesium test.
Okay, and what are we looking for there?
The target range is between 5.5 and 6.5 milligrams per deciliter. If a patient falls below that, the intervention is supplementing with 200 to 400 milligrams of highly absorbable magnesium, like glycinate or threonate.
But why ask for the RBC test specifically? I mean, standard tests miss this, don't they?
They do. Standard serum tests miss up to 30% of subclinical deficiencies.
Because they only measure the magnesium floating freely in your blood serum, which is what, roughly 1% of the total magnesium in the human body?
Yeah, just 1%. The vast majority of it is hiding deep inside your cells and your bones.
It's like trying to check your car's oil with a dipstick that only reaches the top 1% of the tank.
Right.
It might look perfectly full in the stick, but the engine block below could be bone dry.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. The cellular engine relies on magnesium as a stripped molecular key for insulin.
How does that work?
When insulin signals a cell to open up and receive glucose, it requires adequate intracellular magnesium to activate transporters called GLUT4. These transporters have to physically migrate to the cell membrane to pull the sugar inside.
Ah, okay.
Without magnesium, they stay dormant. The glucose remains trapped in the bloodstream.
Which initiates a massive cascade of inflammation and arterial calcification.
Yeah.
But fixing that deficiency yields drastic results.
Yeah.
The meta-analysis covering over 536,000 participants demonstrated that higher magnesium intake drops the overall risk of type 2 diabetes by 22%.
Yeah, and every 100 milligrams drops it by 16%.
And a 2024 trial showed that treating a deficiency improved deep sleep, increased HRV, and lowered systolic blood pressure by nearly 6 points.
Right. So once the cells are properly fueled and producing energy, the natural byproduct of that metabolism is cellular waste. Over time, the cell gets cluttered with damaged proteins and old organelles. That brings the discussion to fasting and cellular cleanup.
Wait, hold on. Let me jump in here because I thought just skipping meals and fasting was enough to trigger cellular cleanup, intermittent fasting. Why do I need to add something else?
Well, that's actually a huge misconception. Fasting itself does not directly clear out damaged cells. The pioneer in this specific area, Dave Asprey, points to landmark longevity research revealing a missing link.
Okay, what's the link?
Fasting creates a biological stress response that forces the body to elevate the production of a molecule called spermidine. Spermidine is the actual chemical trigger that initiates autophagy.
Autophagy being the cellular Pac-Man system where the cell eats its own damaged debris and recycles it for fuel.
Correct. If your biology is deficient in spermidine, you can endure all the systemic stress, hunger, and cortisol elevation of a prolonged fast, but you will fail to flip the switch that activates autophagy.
Oh, wow. So you endure the stress of fasting without the repair response.
Exactly. Researchers conducted a massive landmark study across yeast, fruit flies, worms, and mice. When they genetically blocked the ability to produce spermidine, the fasting benefits dropped to absolute zero.
That is wild.
Yeah, and when they reintroduced spermidine, even without the fasting, the longevity benefits returned.
So the protocol to maximize this cleanup phase is consuming wheat germ or taking a 1 to 3.5 milligram spermidine supplement during periods of caloric restriction.
Right, it forces the clearance of senescent cells, those zombie cells that refuse to die and just secrete inflammation.
And Dave Asprey altered his own biological stack based on this. The cognitive data is fascinating too. Older adults, like ages 60 to 96, who took spermidine supplements, saw measurable cognitive improvements in just 3 months.
Which perfectly transitions the framework from the hardware of the body to the software of the brain. We've fueled the cell and cleared out the physical waste. How do we ensure this physically healthy brain can still effectively learn, adapt, and lock in memories?
The mechanism behind how the brain writes a memory requires a very specific neurochemical state, and this protocol revolves around deliberately manipulating adrenaline.
Yes. Dr. Andrew Huberman, citing foundational research by Dr. McGaugh and Dr. Cahill, details the physiological requirement for memory consolidation.
And the intervention here is introducing a safe, acute physical stressor, right? Like an ice bath, a freezing cold shower, a hard sprint, or even just an intense espresso.
But the key is timing. It has to be immediately after intensely focusing on learning a new skill or consuming new information. The adrenaline spike must occur after the learning event, not before.
Right. I think of adrenaline or epinephrine as the neurochemical save button on a document.
That's exactly what it is.
You can type out a brilliantly complex document, which is the learning phase. But if the power goes out before you hit save, the document vanishes. Adrenaline is the chemical stamp that locks that sensory perception into long-term memory.
High levels of circulating adrenaline signal to the central nervous system that the preceding information is vital for physical survival. It shifts the learning curve so dramatically that tasks requiring hundreds of repetitions can be reduced to one trial learning.
One of the clinical experiments illustrating this is completely wild. Researchers had human subjects read a mundane, boring paragraph of text.
Just completely forgettable stuff.
Yeah. And then one group was instructed to plunge their bare arm into a bucket of freezing ice water, triggering a massive involuntary release of adrenaline.
Right.
That group retained the details of the boring paragraph perfectly, as if it had been a highly emotional life event.
It's amazing.
And there's a historical anecdote, too. Medieval communities intuitively utilized this mechanism. After important historic proceedings or land agreements, they would literally throw the young children of the village into freezing cold rivers.
Yeah, they lacked the vocabulary for neurochemistry, but they empirically understood that sudden, intense, cold-forged, lifelong memories of whatever happened just prior.
It makes you ask, what stands out to you about how our ancestors intuitively understood neurochemistry?
It's profound, but, to even utilize that save button, you have to be able to focus on the information in the first place, and modern attention spans are just notoriously fractured.
Which brings us to the 12-minute attention push-up.
Right. Cognitive neuroscientist Dr. Amishi Shah maps out the attention system not as a single function, but as 3 distinct neural networks working in tandem.
Can you break down her framework for us? What are the 3 systems?
Sure. So the protocol involves meditating for exactly 12 minutes, 4 to 5 days a week, cycling through focused attention, open monitoring, and loving kindness.
Okay, but why those 3?
Well, the first neural system is the flashlight. This is your directed focus, the ability to home in on a single target. The second is the floodlight. This is broad, receptive awareness, observing thoughts passing by without grabbing onto them. And the third is the juggler, which represents your executive coordination. It manages the interaction between the flashlight and the floodlight.
So cycling through those specific styles acts as targeted resistance training for the flashlight, floodlight, and juggler, strengthening those structural tension networks.
Exactly. And Dr. Jha's lab found that 12 minutes is the minimum effective dose required. Furthermore, training this system has a physical downstream effect. It actively promotes glymphatic drainage during sleep.
The glymphatic system is incredible. During deep sleep, the physical mass of the brain actually shrinks so that cerebrospinal fluid can rush in and physically wash out metabolic garbage, like a dishwasher.
Right, and this specific attention training optimizes the low-frequency brain oscillations required to trigger that nightly wash cycle. We also saw this during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Oh, with the highly vulnerable older adults.
Yeah. Those who performed this daily 12-minute trio protected their mood and decreased their reported levels of loneliness, driven primarily by the loving-kindness component.
Which perfectly sets up the problem of emotional resilience. Because even with great attention, we all face moments where our brain gets hijacked by stress, particularly at night. You're lying in bed, and your brain starts spinning a catastrophic what-if scenario. How do we prevent this from shrinking our brains?
Well, research from Dr. Wendy Suzuki highlights that chronic, unmitigated stress is the biggest driver of negative brain plasticity and anatomical shrinkage.
The protocol to counter this is basically a biological judo flip. It's called transforming anxiety into a productivity list.
I love this one.
Right. When you're hit by that spiraling anxiety, you write the worries down, go to sleep, and the crucial step happens the next morning. You attach one specific, actionable step to each worry.
Because anxiety is an evolutionary mechanism designed to provide biological activation energy to protect you.
So by writing it down and assigning an action, you're taking that raw activation energy away from the amygdala, the fear center, and steering it directly into the prefrontal cortex, which governs executive function.
Exactly. You harness it actively to prevent brain damage.
There's the story of the elite NYC lawyer who attributes her success to this. She transformed her midnight paralyzing anxiety into top-tier legal productivity just by addressing her lists with actionable steps.
Actively shifting from helpless fear to actionable logic halts that cortisol cascade. But while writing lists harnesses mental stress, we also need a physical way to ground our nervous system.
Which leads to what might be the most surprising longevity hack of all: barehanded gardening in organic soil.
Yes.
The details are spending 17 minutes daily in green or blue spaces and engaging in barehanded gardening once a week with organic soil.
Yeah.
But is this just about taking a break, or is there something actually happening in the dirt?
There is absolutely something happening in the dirt. Dr. John LaPuma's fascinating research reveals a specific microbe in organic soil called Mycobacterium vacca. When this microbe makes physical contact with human skin, it actively triggers serotonin-producing neurons in both the brain and the gut.
The dirt physically functions as a neurochemical intervention. That's crazy.
It creates a massive shift. It lowers adrenergic stress hormones and shifts the body to a parasympathetic rest and digest state. The stats are astonishing. Engaging in active gardening lowers hemoglobin A1C by 0.5%.
Which is equal to taking an initial prescription dose of metformin for diabetes.
Exactly. And it lengthens telomeres by 2.5 years and reduces overall dementia risk by 37%.
And it requires actual physical interaction. There was that corporate burnout trial where a 5-minute outdoor break reversed burnout, but the control group given an indoor office plant actually got more stressed.
Right, because they were sitting at their desks worrying about overwatering the plant. They didn't get the microbial exposure. They just got an extra chore.
So, to summarize the journey we've been on today, we fueled the cells with magnesium, cleared the waste with spermidine and fasting, forged memories with an adrenaline spike, focused the mind with the 12-minute push-up, harnessed our anxiety with actionable lists, and got our hands in the dirt to lower stress.
And remember, true health isn't about perfectly executing every single protocol. That just creates more stress. It's about understanding the underlying mechanisms of your own body so you can make informed, deliberate choices.
I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. We talked about how medieval communities used freezing cold rivers to forge memories, and how the modern comforts that cause our mitochondria to shut down require synthetic bridges like methylene blue. It raises a fascinating question for you to explore on your own. Is our modern, perfectly climate-controlled, sanitized life actually starving our biology of the fundamental stress signals, like dirt, cold, and acute adrenaline, that our cells evolved to require just to survive and repair themselves? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we'll see you next time.